The Daughters of Zelophehad by Ginzberg. But there was another purpose beside that of establishing Israel's family purity in taking the census at Arbat Moab. For when God at the Exodus from Egypt put his people into Moses' hands, he entrusted them to him after having counted them, and not when Moses was about to depart from this world. He wanted to return the flock that God had entrusted to him, truly numbered, into God's hand. 807. After the number of the nation had been determined, God ordered Moses to divide the promised land among them according to their numbers. 808. Jacob had indeed upon his deathbed determined what parts of the land were to fall to the lot of each tribe, but in order that the tribes might not quarrel among themselves, God decreed that the assignments be made by lot. 809. After the conquest of the land, Joshua and Eleazar saw to the drawing of lots. On this occasion the miracle came to pass that whenever Eleazar drew a lot from the urn, the lot itself announced the words, "I am the lot of thus and so." In this way was avoided the possibility of having the malcontents declare that Eleazar had at the drawing of lots been partial to his friends, and had assigned to them the lots they wished for. 810. When Zelophehad's daughters that had lived piously and wisely like their father and their ancestors, heard that the land was being divided among the male members of the tribe, but not among the female, they took counsel together, discussing what they could do, so that they might not find themselves come out empty-handed. He said, God's love is not like the love of a mortal father, the latter prefers his sons to his daughters, but he that created the world extends his love to women as well as to men, his tender mercies are over all his works. They now hoped that God would take pity on them and give them their share of the promised land, which they loved with as great devotion as their grandsire Joseph, who had upon his deathbed exhorted his children to transfer his body to the Holy Land. 811. Being wise and learned, they waited for a propitious time to lay their case before Moses, an opportunity which they found when Moses in house of teaching recited the law concerning the levirate marriage. They now advanced and said, If we are as good as our brothers, then do we lay claim to our father's inheritance, and to his share of the land. But if we are not to be considered as sons, then should our mother have to marry her brother-in-law, as our father has left no issue, since we do not count. 812. They furthermore pointed out that their father had been neither one of the spies, nor one of Korah's followers, who had, owing to their sins, lost claim to their share of the land. 813. But that he had found his death when a number of men, in spite of Moses' warnings, had presumed to storm the mountain occupied by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. 814. Had our father, continued they, left behind him a son, and the latter were now also dead, then should we lay no claim to inheritance if this son had left a living child, were it even a daughter. But as we are our father's only descendants, give us, we pray, a possession among the brethren of our father. The fervent longing of these women to have a share in the Holy Land shows how much better and more pious were the women of this generation than the men. The latter said, Let us make a captain, and let us return to Egypt, whereas the women said, Give us a possession among the brethren of our father. 815. But not only during the rebellion that was kindled by the spies did the women remain true to Moses and to their God, but on other occasions also it was they who tried to build up what the men had torn down. At the worship of the golden calf, too, they tried to restrain the men from sin. Hence it was the men only that had to die in the desert, because they had been tempted to rebellion by the spies, whereas the women entered into the promised land. 816. Among them also there was even to be found a woman as old as Jochebed, the daughter of Levi by his union with Atta, who survived her sons Moses and Aaron, as well as her daughter Miriam, and who was permitted to enter the promised land at the age of 250 years. 817. The daughters of Zelophehad did not bring their request directly to Moses, but at first urged their plea before the lowest officers, the captains of tens. These, however, said, This is an important matter since it touches upon laws of inheritance, hence it does not become us to decide this matter, greater men than we must settle it. Hence they sent them to the captains of 50s. When these saw that out of consideration for them, the captains of 10s would not pass judgment, they sent the daughters of Zelophehad on to the captains of 100s, that were their superiors. But these too, out of consideration for the higher judges, would not settle this matter, and so the daughters of Zelophehad came to the captains of 1000s, who sent them to the princes of the tribes, until they came at last to the highest authority, to Moses. Now Moses might well have decided this case without further ado, but in his meekness he thought, There is still a higher authority than I, to wit God. And he bade them await God's judgment. 818. The answer that he received from God was as follows, The daughters of Zelophehad have the law on their side, For what they desire is in accordance with the law that was written in heaven by me. Give them therefore their father's inheritance, and also 2 parts of their grandfather Heifer's possessions, for their father Zelophehad was his firstborn, and was therefore entitled to a double share. 819. The daughters of Zelophehad, who in spite of their years the youngest of them had attained 40, had not yet been married, now entered into wedlock, and according to God's bidding that Moses communicated to them, they married their uncle's sons, although they were free to marry whomsoever they chose. 820. God works good through the good, and evil through the evil. The chapter of the laws of God that was published by Moses, as an addition to the incident of Zelophehad's daughters, would have been given without them also, but God rewarded these women for their piety, by making them the direct occasion of this chapter of the law. 821. At the same time, this case of these women was to teach several lessons to Moses. He who, since he had been made God's messenger to the people, had lived apart from his wife, was not to grow too conceited on account of the sacrifice he had made to his sacred calling. Hence in the last year of his life, there appeared before him the daughters of Zelophehad, who of their own accord had not married, because they had not found mates that they considered suitable. Then, too, Moses could not answer the legal question that the daughters of Zelophehad had presented to him, and had to ask God's counsel, which was a second lesson to Moses. At the appointment of the elders, Moses earnestly told them, "The cause that is too hard for ye, bring to me, and I will hear it." And in punishment of these boastful words God so brought it to pass that he could give no answer to this request of the women, whereupon God said to him, "Didst not thou say, The cause that is too hard for ye, bring it to me? And now thou canst not properly settle this legal question of the women." A similar punishment for a similar offense was visited upon David, who, well aware of his erudition, said, "The laws of the Torah do I grasp as easily and as quickly as songs." God then said, "As truly as thou livest, thou shalt hereafter forget a biblical law that even the school children know." So too it came to pass that when he had the holy ark fetched from Gibeah to Zion, he forgot the biblical instruction that the ark may be carried only upon the shoulder, and had it lifted upon a wagon. Then occurred the miracle that the ark leaped of itself into the air, whereas the oxen that pulled the wagon fell down, whereupon Uzzah, to whom the transportation of the ark had been entrusted, stretched out his hand to prevent the ark from falling, and himself fell dead upon the ground. For a sin that is committed is ignorance of the law is accounted as if it had been intentional. Uzzah should have been mindful of the law that the ark was not to be lifted upon a cart, hence his punishment. God thereupon said to David, "Didst thou not say, Thy statutes have been my songs? And thou hast not even mastered the words of the Bible. Unto the sons of Kohath he gave none, because the service of the sanctuary belonged unto them, they bear it upon their shoulders.